What happens when you inherit a debt you never owed? When your father's sins become your burden, and the man who should be your enemy becomes your only hope for survival? Stay with us for a story where betrayal leads to protection, and hatred transforms into something far more dangerous. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. This story will take you on an emotional roller coaster you won't want to miss. The funeral was smaller than Isabella Romano had expected. Only a handful of mourners stood around the simple casket in the rain-soaked cemetery on the outskirts of Boston, their black umbrellas creating a somber canopy against the gray October sky. Most of them were neighbors who barely knew her father, people who came out of obligation rather than grief. Isabella stood apart from the small group, her dark hair whipping in the wind as she stared at the mahogany box that contained all that remained of Michael Romano. At 23, she felt older than her years, worn down by the weight of secrets she was only beginning to understand. The past 6 months of watching her father waste away from pancreatic cancer had aged her in ways that went beyond the physical exhaustion of being a caregiver. She remembered the man he used to be. Strong, confident, always impeccably dressed, even when he was just taking her to school or helping with homework. Michael Romano had been her hero, the single father who had raised her after her mother died in a car accident when Isabella was only 8. He had been her whole world, and now that world felt empty and cold. "I'm sorry for your loss, dear." Mrs. Patterson from next door squeezed Isabella's arm gently, her elderly face creased with genuine sympathy. "Your father was a good man. Always so polite, always asking about my garden. He helped me with my taxes every year, you know. Never asked for anything in return." Isabella nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Good man. If only Mrs. Patterson knew the truth about what Michael Romano had really been, about the life he'd hidden from his daughter for over 2 decades. The late-night phone calls, the mysterious visitors, the envelopes full of cash that appeared on their kitchen table with no explanation. During his final weeks, when the morphine made him delirious, her father had said things that made no sense, apologies for choices he'd made, warnings about people she'd never heard of, desperate pleas for her to leave Boston and never look back. She'd assumed it was the medication talking, the cancer eating away at his brain along with his body. Now she was beginning to suspect it had been something else entirely. As the small crowd dispersed, Isabella remained by the graveside, watching the cemetery workers begin to fill in the hole that would be her father's final resting place. The rain had soaked through her black coat, but she couldn't bring herself to leave. Not yet. This felt like the end of everything she'd ever known, the final severing of her connection to the only family she'd ever had. The financial reality of her situation was crushing. Her father's medical bills had consumed their savings, and the modest life insurance policy wouldn't cover much more than the funeral expenses. The house they'd lived in since she was a child would have to be sold to pay off the remaining debts. At 23, Isabella was facing the prospect of starting over with nothing but a teaching degree and a mountain of inherited debt. Miss Romano. The voice behind her was deep, authoritative with a slight accent she couldn't quite place. Isabella turned to see a man in an expensive black suit standing a respectful distance away. He was tall, probably in his early 30s, with dark hair that was perfectly styled despite the rain and sharp features that belonged on a movie screen. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, dark, intelligent, and carrying a weight that suggested he'd seen more of the world's darkness than most people could imagine. Everything about him screamed money and power, from his Italian leather shoes to the way he carried himself with absolute confidence. He looked like he belonged in boardrooms and exclusive restaurants, not in a working-class cemetery in the rain. "I'm sorry, do I know you?" Isabella asked, pulling her coat tighter against the wind. "No, but I knew your father?" The man stepped closer, and Isabella noticed he moved with the fluid grace of someone who was always aware of his surroundings, someone who had been trained to assess threats and opportunities in every situation. "My name is Dante Moretti. I was hoping we could talk. The name hit. Isabella like a physical blow. Moretti. She'd heard that name. Whispered and hushed conversations between her father and the men who sometimes visited their house late at night. Men who spoke in code and left envelopes full of cash on the kitchen table. Men who made her father nervous in ways she'd never understood. I don't think we have anything to discuss, Isabella said, taking a step back. Her heart was beginning to race, some primitive instinct warning her that this man represented danger in ways she couldn't comprehend. I'm afraid we do. Dante's voice was gentle but firm, carrying an undertone of authority that suggested he was accustomed to being obeyed without question. Your father left some unfinished business that now concerns you. Isabella's heart began to race, her breath coming faster now from more than just the cold. For weeks before his death, her father had been acting strangely, paranoid, constantly looking over his shoulder, making phone calls in the middle of the night. He'd installed new locks on their doors, changed their phone number twice, and started carrying a gun that he thought Isabella didn't know about. She'd assumed it was the cancer, the pain medication making him confused and fearful. Now she was beginning to understand it had been something else entirely. What kind of business? Dante glanced around the cemetery, his eyes scanning for threats with practiced efficiency. Isabella noticed that he wasn't alone. There were at least 2 other men positioned at strategic points around the cemetery, trying to look casual but clearly watching their conversation. Not here. Too exposed. There's a cafe on Hanover Street, Bella Vista. Meet me there in an hour. I'm not meeting you anywhere. I don't even know who you are. You know exactly who I am, Isabella. Your father would have told you about the Moretti family, about the debt he owed us. Dante's expression softened slightly, and for a moment he looked almost sympathetic. I'm not here to hurt you, but there are others who might not be so understanding. The implication hung in the air like a threat. Isabella stared at this stranger who seemed to know more about her father's life than she did, trying to process what he was telling her. The rain was coming down harder now, and she could feel it seeping through her coat, chilling her to the bone. 1 hour, Dante said, turning to leave. And Isabella? Don't go home tonight. It's not safe. He walked away before she could respond, his men falling into step behind him with military precision. Isabella watched them disappear into the maze of headstones and monuments, leaving her alone in the cemetery with more questions than answers, and a growing sense of dread that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't imagine. She stood there for another 10 minutes, letting the rain wash over her as she tried to make sense of what had just happened. Finally, the cold drove her to seek shelter in her car, where she sat with the engine running and the heater on full blast, staring at her reflection in the rearview mirror. The woman looking back at her was a stranger, pale, frightened, with dark circles under her eyes from months of sleepless nights caring for her dying father. But there was something else there, too. Something she hadn't seen in a long time. Determination. Whatever her father had done, whatever debt he'd left behind, she was going to face it head on. She owed him that much. An hour later, Isabella sat in a corner booth at Bella Vista, nursing a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. The cafe was nearly empty, just a few elderly Italian men playing cards near the window and a young couple sharing dessert at a table by the door. The walls were covered with faded photographs of the old neighborhood, back when this part of Boston was still predominantly Italian, and family loyalty meant everything. Dante arrived exactly on time, sliding into the booth across from her with the same fluid grace she'd noticed at the cemetery. Up close, she could see that his expensive suit was perfectly tailored, and there was a small scar above his left eyebrow that suggested a violent past. His hands, she noticed, were well manicured, but bore the calluses of someone who had done physical work at some point in his life. "Thank you for coming," he said, signaling the waitress for coffee. His voice carried a slight Boston accent beneath the more refined tones, suggesting he'd grown up in these streets before money and power had elevated him to a different world. I almost didn't. Isabella studied his face, looking for signs of deception or threat. Tell me about this debt my father supposedly owed you. Dante was quiet for a moment, his dark eyes studying her face with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. When the waitress brought his coffee, he waited until she was out of earshot before speaking. Your father worked for my family for 15 years. He was our accountant, handled the books for several of our legitimate businesses. Legitimate businesses. Isabella's voice was flat. Is that what we're calling it? Some of our businesses are completely legal. Construction, restaurants, import-export. Your father managed the financial side of those operations. Dante paused, adding sugar to his coffee with deliberate precision. But he also had access to information about our other activities. And? 3 months ago, your father disappeared with $2 million and a hard drive containing information that could destroy my family. Dante's voice remained calm, but Isabella could see the steel beneath the surface. Information that could put a lot of people in prison for a very long time. Isabella felt the blood drain from her face. That's impossible. My father was dying. He could barely get out of bed toward the end. The cancer was real. But so was the theft. Dante leaned forward slightly. The question is, what did he do with the money and the information? I don't know anything about any money or information. My father left me nothing but medical bills and a mortgage I can't afford. Isabella's voice rose slightly, drawing glances from the other patrons. If he stole from you, that's between you and him. It has nothing to do with me. I'm afraid it has everything to do with you. Dante's expression was sympathetic but firm. In my world, debts don't die with the debtor. They pass to the next of kin. The words hit Isabella like a slap. You're saying I'm responsible for something my father did? I'm saying that's how others will see it. My uncle, for instance, he's not as reasonable as I am. Isabella laughed, but there was no humor in it. Reasonable. You're talking about making me pay for a crime I didn't commit. I'm talking about keeping you alive. Dante's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. My uncle wants the money and the information back. If he can't get them from your father, he'll get them from you, and he won't be gentle about it. Isabella stared at him, trying to process what he was telling her. Are you threatening me? I'm trying to protect you. Dante reached into his jacket and Isabella tensed, but he only pulled out a business card. This is my number. If anything happens, anything at all, you call me immediately. Why would you want to protect me? If what you're saying is true, I'm your enemy. Dante was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes studying her face. Because I don't believe in punishing children for their parents' sins. And because... He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. Because I think your father may have had good reasons for what he did. Before Isabella could ask what he meant, Dante's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his expression darkened immediately. We need to go. Now. He stood up, throwing money on the table. My uncle's men are at your apartment. Isabella's heart stopped. What? They're looking for the money and the information. When they don't find it... Dante didn't finish the sentence. Come with me. I can keep you safe. Isabella stared at him, her mind reeling. An hour ago, she'd been a grieving daughter with nothing but debt and loneliness. Now she was apparently a target in some kind of criminal war she didn't understand. I can't just disappear with you. I have a job, a life. You had a life. Now you have a choice. Come with me or take your chances with my uncle's men. Dante's voice was urgent now. But decide quickly. They won't wait long before they come looking for you. Isabella looked around the cafe, at the elderly men playing cards, at the young couple sharing dessert, at the normal world she was about to leave behind. Then she looked at Dante, this dangerous stranger who claimed he wanted to protect her. If I go with you, what happens to me? You stay alive long enough for us to figure out what your father really did and why he did it. Dante extended his hand. Trust me, Isabella. It's the only choice you have. Isabella stared at his outstretched hand, knowing that taking it would change everything. But as sirens began to wail in the distance, growing closer by the second, she realized he was right. She had no choice at all. The safe house was nothing like Isabella had expected. Instead of some dingy warehouse or abandoned building, Dante brought her to an elegant townhouse in Beacon Hill, complete with a doorman who nodded respectfully as they entered, and an elevator that required a key card to operate. "This is where you're keeping me safe?" Isabella asked as they rode up to the top floor. "This is where I live," Dante replied simply. "It's the most secure location I can offer you right now." The penthouse apartment was a study in understated luxury. Hardwood floors that gleamed under carefully positioned lighting, expensive furniture that looked like it belonged in an interior design magazine, and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of Boston Harbor. But Isabella also noticed the security cameras positioned at strategic angles, the reinforced windows that were clearly bulletproof, and the way Dante automatically checked multiple locks and a sophisticated alarm system as soon as they entered. The space felt lived in despite its elegance. There were books scattered on side tables, a half-finished chess game set up near the windows, and photographs that showed a younger Dante with people who were clearly family. It was the home of someone who valued both beauty and security, someone who had learned to appreciate the finer things in life while never forgetting the dangers that surrounded him. "You can take the guest room," Dante said, gesturing down a hallway lined with original artwork. "It has its own bathroom and a secure phone line. You'll be comfortable here." "Comfortable?" Isabella laughed bitterly. "I'm a prisoner in a stranger's house because of something my father did. And you think I'll be comfortable?" Dante turned to face her, his expression serious. "You're not a prisoner, Isabella. You're under my protection. There's a significant difference. Is there? Can I leave whenever I want?" Dante was quiet for a moment, and Isabella could see him weighing his words carefully. "Not right now. Not until we figure out what your father took and where he hid it. So I am a prisoner. You're alive. 20 minutes ago, that wasn't guaranteed." Dante moved to the windows, looking out at the city below where lights were beginning to twinkle in the gathering dusk. "My uncle's men tore your apartment apart. When they didn't find what they were looking for, they burned it down." Isabella felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. "They burned down my apartment?" "The whole building. Made it look like an electrical fire." Dante's voice was matter-of-fact, but Isabella could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands clenched slightly at his sides. "3 families are homeless tonight because of your father's choices." The weight of it hit Isabella all at once. The guilt, the fear, the overwhelming sense that her entire world had collapsed in the space of a few hours. She sank onto the leather couch, her hands shaking as the reality of her situation finally sank in. Everything she owned, every photograph and memento from her childhood, every connection to her old life, all of it was gone. "I don't understand any of this," she whispered. "My father was an accountant. He worked for a small firm downtown, did taxes for middle-class families. He wasn't a criminal." Dante moved to the bar and poured 2 glasses of whiskey, offering one to Isabella. The crystal was heavy in her hands, expensive, and the whiskey smelled like it cost more than she made in a week. "Your father was many things. The man you knew was real. He loved you. He tried to give you a normal life. He kept you away from the darkness of his other world. But he was also one of the most skilled financial operators I've ever known." Isabella took the whiskey but didn't drink it. "Tell me about this other world." Dante settled into the chair across from her, his dark eyes studying her face. "The Moretti family has been in Boston for 4 generations. We started as immigrants trying to survive, and we built an empire through determination, loyalty, and when necessary, violence. You're talking about the Mafia. I'm talking about family, about protecting what's ours and taking care of our own." Dante's voice carried a note of pride, mixed with something that might have been regret. "Your father understood that. For 15 years, He helped us build legitimate businesses, clean money, create a foundation for the next generation. Isabella studied his face, trying to understand this man who spoke of violence and loyalty with equal conviction. And then he betrayed you. And then he took something that didn't belong to him. Dante leaned forward. The question is why? Your father wasn't greedy, wasn't reckless. He had to have a reason. Isabella finally took a sip of the whiskey, feeling it burn down her throat. The alcohol helped steady her nerves, but it couldn't quiet the questions racing through her mind. What kind of information was on this hard drive? Dante was quiet for a long moment, clearly debating how much to tell her. When he spoke, his voice was careful, measured. Financial records, business transactions, names and dates and amounts that could unravel 20 years of carefully constructed operations. Enough to destroy your family. Enough to put most of us in prison for the rest of our lives. Dante's expression was grim, including me. Isabella studied his face, trying to understand this man who claimed to be protecting her while admitting she had the power to destroy him. Why are you telling me this? If I'm your enemy, you're not my enemy. You're a victim of circumstances beyond your control. Dante stood up, moving back to the windows where the city lights reflected off the glass like stars. And I think your father may have been trying to protect you. Protect me from what? From my uncle. Dante's voice carried a note of disgust that was impossible to miss. Salvatore Moretti is old school. He believes in blood for blood, in making examples of people who cross the family. He wanted your father dead, and when the cancer beat him to it, he transferred that anger to you. Isabella felt a chill run down her spine. And you don't agree with him? I believe in justice, not revenge. I believe in protecting innocent people, not punishing them for other people's crimes. Dante turned back to her, and she could see something in his dark eyes that looked almost like pain. And I believe your father had a good reason for what he did. What makes you so sure? Dante was quiet for a moment, his expression becoming distant. Because 3 days before he took the money and the hard drive, your father came to see me. He was scared, desperate. He said there were things I needed to know about my uncle, about what he was planning. What kind of things? He never got the chance to tell me. The next day, he disappeared with our money and our secrets. Dante's jaw tightened. But I think he was trying to warn me about something. Something big enough to risk everything for. Isabella set down her whiskey glass, her mind racing. You think my father was trying to protect you? I think your father discovered something that made him choose between his loyalty to the family and his conscience. And I think he chose his conscience. The idea that her father might have been trying to do the right thing, even while committing a crime, was both comforting and terrifying. It meant he wasn't just a thief, but it also meant the information he'd stolen was dangerous enough to kill for. What happens now? Isabella asked. Now we find out what your father really took and why he took it. And we hope we can do it before my uncle runs out of patience. And if we can't? Dante's expression was grim. Then we'll deal with that when it happens. Isabella stood up, moving to the windows to look out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, people were living normal lives, going to work, coming home to their families, worrying about ordinary problems like bills and relationships, and what to have for dinner. The distance between her old life and her current situation felt like an unbridgeable chasm. I had a normal life this morning, she said quietly. I was a kindergarten teacher. I worried about lesson plans and parent conferences and whether I could afford to fix my car. Now I'm hiding in a penthouse because my father stole from the Mafia. I'm sorry, Dante said, and something in his voice made her turn to look at him. You didn't deserve any of this, but I'm stuck with it anyway. For now. But Isabella? Dante moved closer, and she could see something in his dark eyes that looked almost like hope. I promise you this. I will find out what your father took and why he took it. And I will keep you safe while I do it. Why? The question came out as barely a whisper. Why do you care what happens to me? Dante was quiet for a long moment, his eyes studying her face with an intensity that made her heart race. Because someone should. Because you deserve better than to pay for your father's sins. And because... He paused, seeming to struggle with something. Because I think you might be the key to understanding what your father was really trying to do. Isabella stared at him. This dangerous man who had turned her world upside down and then promised to put it back together. She didn't trust him, couldn't trust him, but she was beginning to understand that he might be the only thing standing between her and something much worse. The guest room he showed her was larger than her entire apartment had been, with a king-size bed, a sitting area, and windows that looked out over the harbor. There were fresh flowers on the nightstand, expensive toiletries in the bathroom, and clothes in her size hanging in the closet. "How did you know my size?" Isabella asked, running her fingers over a silk blouse that probably cost more than she made in a month. "I have people who are very good at details," Dante said simply. "You'll find everything you need. If there's anything else, just ask." As he turned to leave, Isabella called out to him. "Dante." He paused in the doorway. "Yes? What do you need me to do?" "I need you to tell me everything you can remember about your father's last few months. Every conversation, every strange behavior, every detail that seemed out of place." Dante's voice was urgent now. Somewhere in those memories is the key to understanding what he took and where he hid it. Isabella nodded, though the thought of reliving her father's final months was painful. "And then? Then we find out if your father was a thief or a hero. And we hope the answer doesn't get us both killed." Isabella spent the next 3 days in Dante's penthouse, going through every memory of her father's final months with the precision of a detective. Dante had provided her with a laptop, legal pads, and all the time she needed to reconstruct the timeline of Michael Romano's last acts. The picture that emerged was troubling. Her father had been acting strangely for months before his death, making phone calls at odd hours, receiving visitors who never gave their names, and asking Isabella questions about her future plans that seemed oddly urgent. She remembered now how he'd started insisting she learn self-defense, enrolling her in a martial arts class and teaching her how to use pepper spray. At the time, she'd thought he was just being an overprotective father, worried about her safety as a young woman living in the city. Now she understood he'd been preparing her for something specific. "He kept asking if I was happy teaching," Isabella told Dante as they sat in his study, surrounded by notes and timelines. The room was lined with law books and financial journals, suggesting Dante was far more educated than the typical stereotype of a crime boss. "He wanted to know if I'd ever thought about moving away from Boston, starting fresh somewhere else." Dante looked up from the financial records he'd been studying, his reading glasses making him look more like a professor than a dangerous criminal. "Did he suggest anywhere specific?" "California. He had a friend there," he said. "Someone who could help me get a job, start over." Isabella frowned, trying to remember the exact conversations. He seemed almost desperate about it toward the end, like he was running out of time to convince me. He was running out of time. Dante set aside the papers and moved to the window. The cancer was progressing faster than the doctors expected. He knew he didn't have long. Isabella joined him at the window, looking out at the harbor where boats moved like toys in the distance. The view was beautiful, but she was beginning to understand that beauty and danger often went hand in hand in Dante's world. "There's something else. A week before he died, he gave me a key." Dante turned sharply, his full attention focused on her. "What kind of key?" "A safety deposit box key. He said it was for emergencies, that I should only use it if something happened to him." Isabella pulled the key from her purse, where she'd been carrying it since the funeral. "I haven't opened it yet. I was afraid of what I might find." Dante stared at the key as if it were a live grenade. "This could be it. This could be where he hid everything. Or it could just be his will and some family photos." Isabella turned the key over in her palm, feeling its weight. "Are you sure you want to know what's in there? If it's the information your uncle wants, Then we'll deal with it. Dante's voice was firm. But we need to know what we're dealing with. The process of getting to the bank required careful planning. Dante's security team conducted surveillance for hours, checking for any sign of Salvatore's men or federal agents who might be watching Isabella's activities. When they were satisfied it was safe, they moved with military precision. An hour later, they stood in the vault of First National Bank, a security guard hovering nearby as Isabella inserted the key into box 247. Her hands were shaking as she turned the key and heard the lock click open. Inside the box was a manila envelope, thick with documents, and a small digital storage device that looked like a USB drive. But there was also something Isabella hadn't expected. A letter addressed to her in her father's handwriting. "We should look at this somewhere private," Dante said, glancing around the bank vault. Back at the penthouse, Isabella spread the documents across Dante's dining room table while he connected the USB drive to his laptop. The papers were financial records, but not the kind Isabella had expected. These weren't business transactions or money transfers. They were personal financial records for dozens of people, including several she recognized as prominent Boston politicians and businessmen. But it was her father's letter that held her attention. With trembling hands, she unfolded the pages and began to read. "My dearest Isabella, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you found yourself in a situation I never wanted you to face. I know you must have questions, and I know you must be angry with me for the secrets I kept. I hope someday you'll understand that everything I did was to protect you. The man who brought you here is Dante Moretti. I know his name must frighten you, but I want you to know that he is not like his uncle. Dante has honor, integrity, and a vision for something better than the world I became trapped in. If anyone can keep you safe, it's him. The information in this box is dangerous, but it's also the key to your freedom. Use it wisely and trust Dante to help you. He's a better man than he knows. I love you more than words can express. Be brave, my darling girl. Be braver than your old man ever was. All my love, Dad." Isabella's eyes filled with tears as she finished reading. Even in death, her father was trying to protect her, trying to guide her through the maze he'd left behind. "What is this?" Isabella asked, studying a document that showed large cash payments to a city councilman. Dante's face had gone pale as he scrolled through the files on the USB drive. "It's a blackmail operation. Your father documented years of bribes, payoffs, and illegal transactions involving some of the most powerful people in the city." Isabella felt sick. "My father was blackmailing people?" "No," Dante's voice was grim. "My uncle was. Your father was just keeping the records." The implications hit Isabella like a physical blow. Your uncle was using the family's legitimate businesses as a front for political corruption. "It looks that way. And your father was documenting everything." Dante continued scrolling through the files. Names, dates, amounts, photographs. This is enough evidence to bring down half the city government. Isabella sank into a chair, overwhelmed by the scope of what they'd discovered. No wonder my father was scared. If this information got out, it would destroy a lot of powerful people. People who would kill to keep their secrets safe. Dante closed the laptop and looked at Isabella with a mixture of admiration and concern. "Your father wasn't just stealing from us. He was trying to expose a massive corruption network. But why? Why risk everything for this?" Dante was quiet for a moment, studying the documents spread across the table. "Look at the dates on these transactions. They go back years, but the most recent ones..." He pointed to a series of payments. "These are from just before your father got sick." Isabella looked at the documents he was indicating. The payments were larger than the others, and they were going to people she didn't recognize. "What do these mean?" "I think your father discovered that my uncle was planning something big. Something that would have used the corruption network for more than just money." Dante's expression was dark. "I think he was planning a hostile takeover of the entire Boston political structure." The scope of it was staggering. Isabella tried to process what Dante was telling her, that her father had stumbled onto a conspiracy that went far beyond simple organized crime. So my father took the evidence to stop him. And to protect you. If my uncle had succeeded in his plan, anyone who could expose him would have become a target, including the daughter of his accountant. Dante moved to the window, his shoulders tense. Your father saved your life by stealing this information. Isabella felt tears burning her eyes. Her father, who she'd thought was just a quiet accountant, had risked everything to protect her and expose a massive conspiracy. What do we do now? Now we have a choice. Dante turned back to her. We can turn this information over to the FBI and let them handle it, or we use it to stop my uncle ourselves. Isabella stared at him. You want to take on your own family? I want to stop a man who's been using our family name to build a criminal empire that goes far beyond anything we've ever been involved in. Dante's voice was passionate now. This isn't about family loyalty anymore, Isabella. This is about right and wrong. And if we're caught, then we'll face the consequences together. Dante moved closer to her. But if we don't act, your father's sacrifice will have been for nothing. And my uncle will continue to destroy lives in the name of power. Isabella looked at the documents scattered across the table. Evidence of corruption, greed, and the abuse of power that her father had died trying to expose. She thought about the normal life she'd lost, the future she'd planned, the safety she'd never have again. But she also thought about the 3 families who were homeless because of her father's choices, about the innocent people who would suffer if Salvatore Moretti's plans succeeded, and about the man standing in front of her who was willing to risk everything to do what was right. What would we need to do? Dante's expression was grim but determined. We'd need to be very careful, very smart, and very lucky. My uncle has resources, connections, and people who will kill for him without question. But you have something he doesn't. What's that? Isabella picked up one of the documents, studying the evidence of her father's courage. You have the truth, and you have someone who has nothing left to lose. Dante stared at her, and Isabella could see something changing in his dark eyes. Respect, admiration, and something that looked dangerously close to affection. Are you sure about this, Isabella? Once we start down this path, there's no going back. Isabella thought about her father, dying alone while carrying the weight of secrets that could have destroyed him. She thought about the innocent people who would suffer if Salvatore Moretti's plan succeeded. And she thought about the man standing in front of her, who had risked everything to protect her when he could have simply handed her over to his uncle. I'm sure, she said. Let's finish what my father started. The plan they developed over the next week was audacious in its simplicity and terrifying in its implications. Using the evidence Michael Romano had gathered, they would expose Salvatore Moretti's corruption network to the FBI, while simultaneously dismantling his power base within the family organization. The key is timing, Dante explained as they sat in his study. Surrounded by copies of documents and detailed plans, we need to move fast enough that my uncle can't cover his tracks, but carefully enough that we don't get ourselves killed in the process. Isabella had spent the past few days learning about the Moretti family structure, understanding the complex web of loyalty and fear that held the organization together. What she'd discovered was that Dante commanded more respect within the family than his uncle realized. The younger generation, in particular, was drawn to Dante's vision of legitimacy and respectability. They were tired of constantly looking over their shoulders, tired of the violence that had claimed too many of their friends and relatives, tired of living in a world where prison or death were the only retirement options. How many people will stand with you? She asked. More than my uncle thinks. A lot of the younger generation is tired of the old ways, tired of the violence and the constant looking over our shoulders. Dante's expression was thoughtful. They want what I want. Legitimate businesses, clean money, a future for their children that doesn't involve prison or early graves. And the older generation? They'll follow strength. If I can prove that my uncle has been using the family for his own personal gain, putting everyone at risk for his political ambitions. Dante shrugged. Loyalty only goes so far when survival is at stake. Isabella studied the organizational chart they'd created, noting the key players who would need to be convinced or neutralized. The family structure was more complex than she'd imagined, with multiple layers of authority and competing interests that Dante would need to navigate carefully. What about your uncle's personal security? That's the dangerous part. He has a core group of men who are completely loyal to him, who will follow his orders no matter what. Dante's voice was grim. If this goes wrong, they won't hesitate to kill both of us. The weight of what they were planning settled over Isabella like a heavy blanket. She was about to help bring down one of Boston's most powerful crime families, and the man she was working with was the heir to that same family. Over the past week, she'd come to understand Dante in ways that surprised her. He was nothing like the stereotypical mob boss she'd expected. He was educated, thoughtful, and genuinely committed to transforming his family's legacy. He read voraciously, spoke 3 languages fluently, and had a master's degree in business from Harvard that he'd earned under an assumed name. But more than that, he was kind to her in ways that went beyond mere protection. He made sure she had everything she needed, listened when she talked about her father and her fears, and treated her like an equal partner in their dangerous enterprise rather than a burden to be managed. "Dante," she said quietly, "what happens to us if this works? What happens to this?" She gestured between them, acknowledging the connection that had been growing stronger each day. Dante was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes studying her face. "I don't know. If we succeed, I'll be the head of a family that's trying to go legitimate. You'll be free to live whatever life you choose, and if we fail, then it won't matter what we want." The honesty of his answer was both refreshing and heartbreaking. Isabella had come to care for this man who had protected her when he could have destroyed her, who had chosen justice over family loyalty, who looked at her like she was something precious rather than a burden to be endured. "There's something I need to tell you," Isabella said, her heart pounding. "About why I'm really doing this." Dante set aside the papers he'd been studying. "I'm listening. It's not just about my father, or about stopping your uncle, or even about justice." Isabella took a deep breath. "It's about you, about what you've shown me these past few weeks." "Isabella, let me finish." She stood up, moving to the window where they'd had so many conversations. "You could have handed me over to your uncle the day we met. You could have let him torture the information out of me, or kill me to send a message. Instead, you protected me. You listened to me. You treated me like a person instead of a problem to be solved." Dante moved to stand behind her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body. "You are a person. A remarkable person who deserves better than any of this. But this is what I have. This situation, this choice, this chance to do something that matters." Isabella turned to face him. "And I have you. For however long this lasts, I have you." Dante's expression was pained. "Isabella, you don't understand what you're saying. I'm not a good man. I've done things, made choices. You're a better man than you think you are. And you're the only man who's ever made me feel like I was worth protecting." Isabella reached up to touch his face, feeling the slight roughness of his stubble. "Whatever happens, I want you to know that." Dante caught her hand, pressing it against his cheek. "If we do this, if we go through with this plan, there's a good chance we won't survive it. Then we better make sure these next few days count." Dante stared at her for a long moment, and Isabella could see the war being fought behind his dark eyes. Duty versus desire, protection versus passion, the careful distance he'd maintained versus the connection that had been building between them. "Isabella," he said quietly, "if I kiss you right now, everything changes. There's no going back to the way things were." "Good," Isabella whispered. "I don't want to go back." When Dante kissed her, It was with the desperate intensity of two people who knew their time might be measured in days rather than years. Isabella felt like she was falling and flying at the same time. Like every moment of loneliness and fear she'd experienced had led to this man, this choice, this chance at something real in the middle of a world gone mad. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Dante rested his forehead against hers. "Whatever happens," he said quietly, "I want you to know that meeting you, protecting you, falling for you, it's been the best thing I've ever done, even if it destroys everything you've worked for. Especially then." Dante's smile was sad but genuine. "Because it means I chose love over fear, and that's something my uncle will never understand." The next morning, they put their plan into motion. Isabella walked into the FBI field office in downtown Boston, carrying copies of all the evidence her father had gathered. She told them everything about the corruption network, about Salvatore Moretti's political ambitions, about the danger she'd been in and the protection Dante had provided. The federal agents who interviewed her were initially skeptical, but the evidence was overwhelming. Financial records, photographs, recorded conversations. It painted a picture of corruption that reached into every level of Boston's political establishment. Meanwhile, Dante called a meeting of the family's senior members, presenting them with evidence of his uncle's betrayal and asking for their support in removing him from power. The meeting was tense, with old loyalties warring against new realities, but in the end, the evidence was too compelling to ignore. By evening, both operations were in motion. FBI agents were preparing raids on the corrupt officials identified in Michael Romano's documents, while within the Moretti family, a quiet revolution was beginning. Isabella waited in Dante's penthouse, watching the news reports of arrests and raids across the city. Her phone rang constantly, reporters wanting interviews, FBI agents needing clarification, lawyers offering their services. When Dante finally returned home, he looked exhausted but victorious. "It's over," he said, pulling Isabella into his arms. "My uncle is in federal custody, along with most of his inner circle. The family voted unanimously to remove him from power. And you? I'm the new head of the Moretti family. Such as it is." Dante's smile was rueful. "Most of our legitimate businesses will survive the investigation. The rest, well, we'll rebuild." Isabella felt a mixture of relief and uncertainty. "What does that mean for us?" Dante cupped her face in his hands, his dark eyes serious. "It means you're free to choose whatever life you want. You can go back to teaching, move to California like your father wanted, start fresh somewhere new." "And if I choose to stay?" "Then you stay. With me if you'll have me. Building something new from the ashes of something old." Dante's voice was soft but certain. "I love you, Isabella Romano. I love your courage, your strength, your ability to see good in people even when they can't see it in themselves." Isabella felt tears burning her eyes, but they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. "I love you too, and I choose to stay. I choose you." When Dante kissed her this time, it was with the promise of a future neither of them had dared to imagine. Outside, Boston continued its ancient rhythms. But inside the penthouse, two people who had found each other in the darkness were finally stepping into the light. 6 months later, Isabella stood in the renovated community center that had once been one of Salvatore Moretti's front operations. Now it housed an after-school program for at-risk youth, funded by the Moretti family's legitimate businesses and staffed by teachers like Isabella who believed in second chances. The transformation had been remarkable. What was once a place of fear and corruption had become a beacon of hope for the neighborhood. Children who might have been drawn into the same cycle of violence that had claimed so many generations before them now had a safe place to learn, grow, and dream of better futures. Dante found her there, watching a group of children work on art projects, their laughter filling the space with hope and possibility. "Any regrets?" he asked, slipping his arms around her from behind. Isabella leaned back against his chest, feeling the solid warmth of his presence. About which part? Falling in love with a former crime boss, helping bring down a corruption network, or giving up my quiet life as a kindergarten teacher? Any of it. All of it. Isabella turned in his arms, looking up at the man who had become her partner in every sense of the word. The only thing I regret is that my father didn't live to see how his sacrifice changed everything. How it saved not just me, but you, and all the people who will benefit from the choices we made. Dante's smile was soft and genuine. I think he knows. And I think he'd be proud of the woman you've become. We've become, Isabella corrected. We did this together. Together, Dante agreed, and kissed her as the children's laughter echoed around them, a soundtrack of hope for the future they were building from the ashes of the past. In the end, Michael Romano's betrayal had led not to destruction, but to redemption. His daughter had found love in the most unlikely place, and the man who should have been her enemy had become her greatest protector and deepest love. Sometimes the sins of the father become the salvation of the child. And sometimes the most dangerous choice you can make is the one that leads you home. What an incredible journey of love, betrayal, and redemption. Isabella and Dante proved that sometimes our greatest enemies can become our greatest loves, and that the courage to do what's right can transform everything. Could you have made the same brave choices they did? What did you think of their love story born from such dangerous circumstances? Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell for more heart-stopping stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Share your thoughts in the comments. Which moment touched your heart the most?